The third time he knelt. Not bowed, knelt. Both knees in the frozen mud of my own dooryard, snow catching white in hair the colour of a wolf's winter coat, while 6 armoured riders sat their horses behind him and pretended very hard not to watch their king beg a stillroom girl for anything. I remember thinking, with the strange clarity that comes right before your life changes shape, that I could end him with one word. Not his life. Something he would have minded losing more. Say it again, I told him. Say why. He did. And it was not the reason I expected, and it broke something open in me that 2 royal summons and every ounce of my good sense had failed to touch. But that comes later. It started 3 weeks before any of that, with a letter I did not want and a man I had not yet learnt to fear. I was elbow deep in nettle mash when the first letter came, which tells you everything about how seriously I took it. Old Yara handed it to me, sealed in wax the colour of a bruise, the Iron Territory's wolf pressed into it so deep you could feel the fangs with your thumb. And I set it on the windowsill and kept crushing nettles, because whatever it wanted could wait until my hands were clean. It could not, as it turned out. It wanted me at the king's fortress within the fortnight, to be presented, the letter's actual word, presented, like a dish, as a candidate for his court. I read it twice, standing in the steam and the green smell of the stillroom, and laughed once, short and disbelieving, because I make stillroom draughts for chilblains and childbed fever, and I had never in my life stood in the same room as an alpha king. I wrote back that same night. 2 lines. Grateful, but no. I did not think a king would notice a girl's handwriting turn him down. I underestimated how much a wolf notices. The second letter came 9 days later, and it was not a summons this time. It was an invitation, phrased with a formality so exact it felt rehearsed, offering an escort, a room of her own choosing, a place at his table for as long as she cared to stay, no obligation implied. The letter insisted, twice, as though repeating it might make it true. I have spent my whole life reading what people don't say. What that letter didn't say was why me, and its silence on that single point was louder than everything it did say. I sent it back with 3 lines this time. Still no. I hope you find whoever you're actually looking for. I did not expect a king to take that as a starting position rather than an answer. That is the part of him I had not yet met. I should tell you what I knew of him, which was what everyone in the border villages knew, that the Iron Territories had been failing their harvests 2 winters running. That the king's own advisers murmured about an old broken pact needing mending, and that Thorn of the Iron Wolves had never, in 9 years on the wolf throne, been seen to want a single thing publicly. He took what needed taking and left what didn't interest him, cleanly, without appetite. A man built for ruling, not for wanting. That was the shape of him in the stories, and I had no reason yet to think the stories were wrong. The wolf hierarchy runs the way water runs, down, always down, and I was about as far down as a person could be, and still matter to the pack at all. Stillroom girl. No bloodline anyone tracked. The kind of low-ranked outsider whose name a king's court would not trouble itself to learn twice. Which is, I understood later, precisely why it mattered so much that his wolf would not stop trying to learn mine. The law came to me the way law should, attached to something I could not ignore. Old Yara told me, while I ground willow bark for her knees, that the Iron Territories were dying by inches under a pact struck 3 generations back. A bond curse laid on the wolf throne itself. No true harvest until an alpha bound himself to a mate his wolf chose freely. Not one chosen for him by council or crown. Thorn's father had refused his own wolf's choice for the sake of a border alliance, and the frost had been creeping half a season earlier every year since, eating fields a little further south each winter. I did not think much of it. It was a story about a king's family, not about nettle mash and chilblains, and I had a life of my own to keep tending. I did not yet know how close that frost line had crept to my own village. The third summons did not come as a letter at all. It came as a wolf. I found him at first light, sitting in my dooryard like he'd been carved there, enormous, iron grey, patient in a way that made the hair rise on my arms, because wolves that size are not patient by nature. He had something in his jaws. He set it down at my feet with a care that seemed almost apologetic, and trotted off before I could do more than stare, and when I picked it up it was a pressed sprig of the same willow bark Yara had asked me to grind, tied with a strip of cloth too fine for any pack member I knew. He came back the next morning with a spool of blue thread. The morning after that, a single glove. Mine, the one I'd lost at the river crossing a month before and given up for gone. By the fourth morning, half the village had noticed. By the fifth, old Yara was laughing so hard into her tea she had to set the cup down, and telling anyone who'd listen that the king's own wolf had taken to courting the stillroom girl with lost mittens and pressed flowers. And did I know what that meant? And did I want her to explain it slowly? I did not need it explained slowly. I understood it. I simply refused to believe a king's wolf deciding something meant the king himself had decided anything at all. A wolf is instinct. A king is choice. I had turned him down twice already. In ink, in my own hand, and instinct leaving flowers on my step did not obligate me to a single thing. That was the morning he came himself. He knelt in my dooryard, snow in his hair, and 6 riders behind him pretending not to watch, and I stood in my own doorway with flour still on my hands from the morning bread, and thought, absurdly, that I should have changed my apron. "You've refused me twice," he said. Not an accusation. A fact he was laying down between us like a stone he needed me to look at. I have. I came to ask a third time myself, because I owed you that much, a man asking instead of a king summoning. He did not stand. I noticed that. I noticed everything. That morning, the exact grey of his eyes, the way his jaw worked once before the next words came, like he was choosing each one with the same care his wolf had chosen willow bark and blue thread. "I am not asking you to my court, because you would look well in it," he said. "I am asking because in 11 weeks the frost line reaches your village, and I cannot stop it without you. And I would rather you hate me for asking honestly than let you freeze not knowing I could have." I stood very still, flour on my hands. The whole street watching from behind shutters not quite closed. That is not what your letters said. My letters were written by men who thought a girl from a stillroom needed flattering, not the truth. His mouth did something that was almost a wince. I let them write the letters. That is the part I am not proud of. I want to tell you I said something devastating. I did not. I said, "Get up. You'll ruin your knees in that mud. And then what good are you to anyone's harvest?" And he looked at me like I'd handed him something he hadn't known he was short of, and got up, and that was the third asking, and the first true one. I said yes to the escort. Not to him. I was careful about that distinction, out loud and in the silent, stubborn place where I kept my own counsel. Because a girl who has been made a symbol before knows the difference between being wanted and being needed matters less to everyone else than it matters to her. If you want to know whether I made it through my first week in a king's fortress with that distinction intact, and whether his wolf ever stopped leaving things at my door, stay with me. This is the part where it gets complicated, and I would rather you heard it from the person who lived it than guessed. The fortress was stone and wood smoke, and colder than any stillroom I'd worked in, and I was given a room twice the size of my whole cottage, and told, gently, by a man named Edric, who turned out to be the king's second, and who I liked immediately for never once calling himself anything but Edric, that I could leave any morning I chose and an escort would take me home without question. He told you to say that, I said. He told me to mean it, Edric said. There's a difference, and he'd want you to notice it. I noticed. I noted, too, that no one in that fortress called him by his rank to my face. Not once. Which I understood later was its own kind of courtesy, a court careful not to make me feel like the lowest rung of anything, even by accident of address. The court noticed me the way courts notice anything unwelcome, at first with silence, then with Lady Cressida. She found me on my third day, in the corridor outside the library, and introduced herself with a smile that did not reach anything below her cheekbones. Her father held the southern border march, she told me, and had held the king's private confidence since before I was born. And wasn't it curious how a still-room girl had ended up housed in the East Wing, which was traditionally reserved for guests of consequence? I wouldn't know, I said. I didn't choose the room. No, she agreed. I imagine you didn't choose any of this. She said it kindly, which was worse than if she'd said it cruelly, and left me standing there turning her words over for the rest of the afternoon. Because she hadn't been wrong about the part that mattered. I hadn't chosen the letters, or the wolf, or the frost line 11 weeks from my village. I had only chosen, so far, not to leave. I saw him properly for the first time that evening, in the library, where I'd gone to find something that wasn't a still-room manual, because my hands didn't know what to do with idleness. He was already there, one boot up on the hearth rail, a book open on his knee that he was very obviously not reading. You found the library, he said. You found the wolf a spool of thread. I found a library. We're both resourceful. His mouth did the almost wince, almost smile thing again. He set the cup he was holding down too carefully, like it required more attention than a cup deserved, and said, I owe you an accounting of the curse, if you'll have it. Properly this time. Not through Edric, not through court gossip. I'm listening. He told it plainly. None of the grandeur I'd have expected from a man raised to rule. His father had chosen an alliance over his own wolf's mate, 3 generations of frost ago, and the ground had been paying for it ever since. A little more each winter. A little further south, and no council decree or war chest had ever slowed it, because the pact wasn't broken by armies. It was broken by choice, freely made, and undone the same way. My wolf knew you before I let myself, he said. That's not romance. That's just true. I'm telling you because you deserve the actual reason, not the pretty one. I sat with that for longer than 3 sentences let me sit with anything these days, long enough that he noticed, and didn't fill the silence, which I found I respected more than I wanted to. You could have led with the curse, I said finally, instead of 2 letters about court and candidacy. I could have. My counsel thought the truth would frighten a girl into refusing outright. I thought it would frighten you less than being lied to. We disagreed. You'll notice which one of us was right. I laughed before I could stop myself, and something in his shoulders came down 1/2 inch, like he'd been braced for a different sound. The wolf found me twice more that week, once with a ribbon stolen clean off Lady Cressida's own sleeve, which caused a stir in the great hall that took Edric a full afternoon to smooth over, and once simply by walking into the still room the fortress had given me, and lying down across the doorway like a very large, very smug draft excluder, refusing to move until I stepped over him on purpose and let my hand trail through his fur, which he accepted with the enormous, undignified satisfaction of a creature who had gotten exactly what he wanted. He does this to everyone, I asked Edric, who was watching from the corridor with the particular resignation of a man who had given up predicting his king's wolf years ago. He has never once done this, Edric said. Not to a councillor, not to a lunar candidate his father favoured, not to anyone. I'd enjoy your reaction more if I weren't also slightly afraid of what it means for the rest of us when he finally admits it. If you're wondering whether I believed him yet, whether still-room girl caution had cracked at all, I hadn't. Not fully. Wanting is not the same as trusting. And I had 11 weeks of frost and a court full of cressidas to get through before I'd let myself call this anything but complicated. That was the week I stopped being able to call it simple. It happened at the Equinox gathering, the first true court event I'd been made to attend. In a hall so bright with torchlight, it felt like standing inside a struck flint. I was seated, deliberately, I understood later, by Thorn's own hand and against 3 separate objections from his council, not at the far tables with the minor households, but at the high table itself, 2 seats from the throne. The lowest-ranked woman in the hall, placed where the highest sat. The room noticed. The room always notices. His wolf noticed harder. Mid-feast, with the whole hall watching, he rose from beside the throne, crossed the entire floor in front of 200 nobles, who outranked me by every measure that room recognized, and settled himself at my feet with his great head resting against my knee, in front of God and Cressida and everyone. The silence that followed had a texture to it. I have never in my life felt so watched. He does that, Thorn said into the quiet, not looking away from me, when he's decided something the rest of the room hasn't caught up to yet. And what has he decided? You'll have to ask him. I'm still catching up myself. The hall did not know whether to laugh or gasp, and settled on both, and I felt the shape of the whole evening tilt, because a king had just told 200 witnesses that his wolf understood something he hadn't caught up to, and there is no unsaying a thing like that in a room built to remember every word a king says. Cressida did not laugh. I watched her face do something careful and controlled instead, and understood, with the specific unease of someone who has just made an enemy without meaning to, that I had made one. She came for me 11 days later, and she was not subtle about it, because subtlety was no longer useful to her. It happened in the still room. Of all places, she found me alone, grinding feverfew, and told me plainly that the frost line was not, in fact, 11 weeks from my village. It was 4. She had seen the surveyor's reports her father kept. Thorn had known for a month and told no one outside his council, because a panic 4 weeks before the deadline served him worse than a calm village with no idea how close the edge was. He's using you, she said, the same way his father used every mate candidate before you. For the pact, for the harvest, for the throne's survival. The affection is real. I don't doubt his wolf believes it, but believing it and it being the whole truth are different things, and someone should tell you before you give up more than you understand you're giving. I did not sleep that night. 4 weeks. Not 11. A month he had known and not told me, however gently his reasons might be dressed. I confronted him the next morning in the corridor outside his council chamber, in front of no one, which was its own mercy, because what I said would not have survived being witnessed. 4 weeks, I said, not 11. He did not deny it, and did not reach for an excuse either, which I noticed even through the anger, a lesser man would have reached for one immediately. 4, he said. I found out 3 days before Cressida did, and I have spent every one of those 3 days trying to find a way to tell you that didn't sound like a threat aimed at your own village to force your hand. I haven't found one. I'm sorry. That's the truth. Badly delivered. You let me think I had time to decide. I let myself hope you'd decide before you needed to know how little time there was. That was selfish. I see that now, looking at your face. His jaw moved once before the rest came. I would rather lose you honestly than keep you on a lie I told myself was kindness. I did not answer him. I walked away, and I want you to know I did not look back, though it cost me something to manage it, and for 2 full days I let the fortress believe I might simply leave. It was Edric who found me on the second evening, in the library, staring at a book I wasn't reading, which felt like a fitting mirror of where I'd first found Thorn doing the exact same thing. He hasn't slept, Edric said, without preamble. Not out of guilt performance. I've known him 9 years. I know the difference. He thinks he's lost the one thing his wolf ever asked for outright, and he's letting himself believe he deserves that, because it's easier than hoping. He lied to me. He mismanaged the truth for 3 days out of fear, and told you himself the moment you asked, without excuse. I'm not going to pretend those are the same thing as a lie, because I don't think they are, and I think some part of you doesn't either. Or you'd already be halfway home, instead of sitting in his library reading nothing. I sat with that longer than 3 sentences allow. I let it land anyway. Something had shifted in me by the time I set the book down. I could feel it, a hardening where there had been only wariness before, a decision forming that the first weak version of me would not have recognized as her own. I was done being careful in the way that protects nothing and costs everything. Take me to him, I said. I found him in the great hall, alone, the torches half burned, and I did not soften what I said. You should have told me the day you knew. Not because I'd have left, because I had a right to choose with the truth in my hands, and you took 3 days of that choice from me deciding what I could bear to hear. Don't do it again. Not about the frost, not about your counsel, not about anything. I would rather you hand me the worst truth you have than the kindest lie. I won't, he said, and something in his voice had changed too. Steadier, stripped of the careful diplomacy I'd heard in every word before. I give you my word, and I've never given that word lightly to anyone. We had 4 weeks then, not 11. And Cressida had one more move left in her, and she was not finished. It came at the Frostline Council itself, 3 days before the deadline, in front of every border lord in the Iron Territories. Cressida rose before Thorn could open the session and produced, with the timing of someone who had been saving it, a letter she claimed to have found among his father's old correspondence. Proof, she said, that the ancient pact required not merely a freely chosen mate, but one of proven bloodline, and that a still-room girl with no lineage anyone could trace would void the binding entirely, and doom the harvest regardless of what his wolf wanted. The hall turned to look at me. I felt every one of those eyes the way you feel cold water, all at once, everywhere. I did not wait for Thorn to answer for me. Read the letter again, I said, into a silence so complete I heard my own pulse. Not the part you quoted, the part above it. Because I had spent 3 weeks in that library reading everything I could find on the old pact. Out of the same stubborn need to understand my own situation that had once made me grind nettles instead of opening a royal seal, and I had read that exact clause a week before, in a different hand, in a different ledger, and it said the opposite of what she'd claimed. It says proven devotion, not bloodline. Someone changed a single word between your father's copy and this one, my lord, and I don't think it was your father who changed it. Cressida's composure did not break. But her father's did, 3 seats down, in the particular way of a man realizing his daughter has just been caught holding a forgery in front of the entire border nobility. She's right, Edric said quietly. A ledger already open in his hands, he had, I learnt later, suspected the forged clause for a week, and simply been waiting for the moment it would matter most to prove it. The original reads devotion. I checked it myself 3 days ago. Cressida left the hall before anyone asked her to. Her father did not follow immediately, which told its own story about where his loyalty had actually been standing all along. I had not meant to be the one who unmade her. I had meant, going in, to stand quietly and let Thorn handle his own court. But quiet had never been the whole truth of me, and some things, a stolen word in a forged letter, a room ready to believe the worst of me without evidence, are not things I know how to let pass unanswered. The frost broke on the 3rd night, at the true edge of the deadline, and it did not break gently. I felt it before I understood what I was feeling. A cold that had nothing to do with the season, driving into my hands like the pact itself was testing whether I meant what I'd said in that corridor. Thorn stood beside me on the fortress wall as the old magic tried. One last time to hold, the air going thin and sharp, frost climbing the stone under our joined hands like it meant to claim something back before it let go. I gripped the parapet edge hard enough that a rough stone opened a thin line across my palm. And I did not let go, because letting go, in that moment, felt like the one thing I refused to give the curse. "You don't have to hold on that hard," he said low, his voice rough with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite awe. "Yes," I said through my teeth, "I do." The frost broke like a held breath finally released, not with fanfare, but with a quiet, bone-deep loosening, the kind of ending that doesn't announce itself so much as simply stop fighting. Somewhere below the wall, I heard, faint and certain, the sound of the fortress dogs beginning to bark at nothing, the way animals do when something in the air has genuinely changed. He turned to me with snow still melting in his hair, and this time there was no council chamber between us, no letters, no 3 days of careful, mismanaged truth. "I am not asking a third time," he said. "I'm past asking. I'm telling you what's true, and you can do with it what you will. My wolf knew the day he sat at your feet in front of 200 witnesses. I am only now, finally, caught up to him. I did not narrate to myself what it felt like when he kissed me. I can tell you what came before it, his hand at my jaw, careful of the cut across my palm, a stillness between us that had been 3 weeks building. And I can tell you what it left behind. Something in my chest that had been braced since the first sealed letter finally, fully unclenched, like a door I hadn't known I was holding shut, had simply swung open on its own weight. That is all I intend to say about it. The rest belongs to us." 3 months later, the fields south of my old village were green in a way no one my age had ever seen them. And the letter arriving that morning was not sealed in bruise-coloured wax, but in my sister's careless red thumbprint, full of news about the harvest and a joke about whether the king's wolf still stole things, because apparently the whole territory knew about the glove and the ribbon by now and found it endlessly funny. He did still steal things. He'd taken to leaving them on my side of a bed I hadn't expected to be sharing so soon, in a fortress that had stopped feeling cold sometime around the 2nd month, in a court where Edric now called me by name without anyone blinking, and where a border lord's seat sat conspicuously, permanently empty. I stood at that same fortress window where I'd once read a letter I didn't want, watching a very large grey wolf attempt, with enormous dignity, to steal an entire loaf of bread off the kitchen sill in broad daylight, and I thought about the girl who'd answered 2 royal summons with 2 lines apiece, and no idea what either refusal was actually costing. She hadn't been wrong to refuse. She just hadn't yet met the man worth saying yes to properly, the one who came a 3rd time and asked instead of summoned, and meant every word of it, and never once made her regret making him wait. Do you think I was right to make him ask a 3rd time? Or should I have believed the wolf the first morning he left flowers at my door? Tell me your theory, and if you want to know what happens when a king's court finally meets a stillroom girl who won't be managed, comment the wolf, and I'll know you're still with me. Come back for the next one. I promise it's worth the wait, the same way I turned out to be.